In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, the federal government ratified the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, officially abolishing slavery and guaranteeing equal citizenship. For a few brief years during Reconstruction, Black Americans were integrated into the political and economic life of the nation, voting in massive numbers and holding office. But in 1877, a political compromise resulted in federal troops being withdrawn from the South. Without that protection, the brief experiment in racial equality collapsed. What replaced it was a nearly century-long period stretching to the 1950s. This was a deliberately constructed architecture of state-sanctioned oppression. The seizure of native land, the destruction of Black business districts, and the freezing of Japanese American assets during this era created a massive transfer of wealth. To understand why modern economic disparities exist, we have to study the specific mechanisms of this century the nation often tries to forget. The first method of control relied on building a legal foundation that appeared neutral on paper, but functioned as a trap. Look at this systemic flowchart of the Jim Crow South. The 15th Amendment explicitly protected voting rights, so states built cascading gateways to bypass it. They instituted poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and unfairly administered literacy tests. A citizen would face an interconnected web of barriers designed to strip Black Southerners of their access to the ballot box. When a 23-year-old named Fred Kuramatsu challenged his arrest, the Supreme Court ruled the internment constitutional. During these decades, the American legal system functioned as it was designed. It bypassed justice to enforce a rigid racial hierarchy. Physical and legal subjugation is highly effective, but total control requires a second pillar, comprehensive cultural erasure. On the Great Plains, professional hunters, often encouraged by the military, slaughtered an estimated 30 million buffalo. This was a calculated ecological tactic to induce starvation and eliminate the independence of Native American nations. General Philip Sheridan, who commanded the army in the West, explicitly endorsed this destruction. He stated that the hunters had done more to solve the so-called Indian question than the entire regular army, treating starvation as a practical solution to clearing the land. Starvation forced tribes onto reservations, which opened the door for the federal Indian boarding school system. Beginning in 1879, children were forcibly removed from their families. Their hair was cut, their names were changed, and their traditional languages were forbidden under a single guiding motto: kill the Indian, save the man. Bullets can destroy a generation, but targeting children to sever their ties to thousands of years of tradition is a more permanent method of control. When marginalized citizens manage to navigate the legal traps and survive cultural destruction, a final enforcement mechanism kept them in their assigned place: terror. Between 1877 and 1950, over 4,000 Black Americans were lynched in public spectacles. The federal government watched in silence, with Southern senators blocking anti-lynching legislation over 200 times. In 1921, a white mob of 10,000 people reduced 35 blocks of Tulsa's Black Wall Street to ash in under 24 hours. This community, once home to successful doctors, lawyers, and grocery stores, was leveled, and the land was later seized by the city. Mainstream culture frequently celebrated this terror. The 1915 film Birth of a Nation depicted Ku Klux Klan members as heroes defending white civilization, and President Woodrow Wilson screened the film directly at the White House. Encouraged by this acceptance, the Klan swelled to an organization of up to 6 million members. By 1925, 40,000 men in full robes and hoods marched openly down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. State-sanctioned terror was integrated into the social order. It was a vital tool for maintaining white dominance across the country. This timeline shows the sheer span of these actions, heavily clustered in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Notice the massive, empty gap stretching for decades before any official response. Apologies for Japanese internment didn't arrive until 1988, and it took until 2022 to pass a federal anti-lynching law. The truth was suppressed. On this same timeline, you can see the Tulsa Race Massacre. It was scrubbed from history, creating an 80-year void before formal acknowledgement. Despite living under a system built to break them, these communities preserved their cultures. Black Americans rebuilt neighborhoods under the threat of terror. Native Americans bravely kept their languages alive, and Japanese Americans started over after having everything taken from them. When the city of Tulsa seized the land of Black Wall Street without compensation, it stopped the accumulation of generational wealth that would have been passed down for a century. These specific acts of asset seizure and economic exclusion are the direct historical engines behind modern economic patterns. Acknowledging the shadow century is a necessary examination of the American foundation. A democracy demands the courage to look unflinchingly at its own history. Admitting wrongdoing and acknowledging where the system deliberately caused harm requires profound strength. America has always claimed to be a nation where all people are created equal. Only by confronting the deliberate architecture of its darkest era can it finally realize that foundational promise.